this work session to order, starting introduction, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Meg Zalatow.
Forrest Dunbar.
John Littleton.
Suzanne France.
Felix Rivera.
Chris Shearney, Office of Economic and Development.
Dean Casey.
All right, so I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Dunbar if you want to introduce the topic. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we've got copies that members of the public or anybody else wants a copy. This is for prepared by Fish and Game. Mr. Shee, you should probably get a copy too, and Mr. King. Dave, what's your last name again?
Saalfeld. It's Saalfeld.
So I guess, well, first I'll do a little preface, and then I'll ask Mr. Saalfeld to present this. Late last year, we had a work session on this topic, which is called bear-human interactions, a little bit of a euphemism. We're talking about bears getting trashed, and bears generally being in neighborhoods, and the problems that causes. When I went door knocking in my district last summer, this was the #1 issue that, late last summer, this is the #1 issue that my constituents had. And this and public safety more generally. And so there's been an intervening event for the last 4.5 months, which is Mr. Weddleton's re-election. I think I sort of got distracted and hasn't been able to move this ball forward. The administration has been working on a draft ordinance dealing mostly with fines of residents, and Mr. Judy could perhaps speak more to that. But I've been also working with Mr. Battle, David Battle from the Department of Fish and Game, who's been coming to several of our community councils, me and Mr. Peterson, particularly Northeast Community Council and also Stuckingham Heights. Those are two that have a lot of issues with bears. So he unfortunately could not be here today, but they have done some research, basically statistical analysis, to show where most of these issues with bears getting trashed are. And I suppose Mr. Oh my gosh, sorry, Saalfeld. Could you introduce yourself and then just explain briefly about this document we have in front of us?
Sure, thank you for having us here. My name is Dave Saalfeld. I'm a research biologist. So Dave Battle is the area biologist for this for Anchorage, and I'm one of the ones doing research on several species through here. So I've worked with bear and other species working in this area. And so this map Dave and some fellow colleagues put together for us is only calls from the public. So previous years, in 2016, we had collars on bears, and we have some movement data from that. But this is only public calling in reports of bears. So what we basically did was, there's 2 different colors on the map. There's yellow for brown bear and black for brown bear reports. And the way this works is the darker, as you get to the red, that means there's more calls from the public in the map. So you see like Upper Muldoon, near Bicentennial Campground area, and along Upper Muldoon through some of the, up into Bartlett High School area. You can see that there was a darker red there. That's where some of their highest volume of calls were in 2018. And you can see if you look down along the hillside, it gets more of a yellowish color, so we had another peak of calls in that area. And you can see there's a lot more mix of brown bears in the upper hillside. And you have a few along the coastal areas, along the bluff, along Kincaid area and through Bayshore, and a few along Westchester and Government Hill area. That Eagle River is pretty much, black bears and brown bears covering all through Eagle River. It wasn't really a high density area, but there's a lot of calls through Eagle River. And we didn't make a full blow up of Girdwood. We get several calls a year from Girdwood too, but what we did was the next page is a blow up of Anchorage itself, the bowl there. And you can see last year, Muldoon was definitely with the brightest red, is where we had our most calls. But from year to year, I want to put this on the record, is from year to year that red shifts a little bit. It's not always that general area. Next year or this year it could be south a couple miles. Muldoon is always going to have bears in it in trouble, but the density of calls might shift from year to year, and we really do see that from. There might be on the hillside. There might be a few subdivisions that get hit hard for a couple years, and then that might shift south or something like that. So it's not always the same neighborhood, but we do consistently have bears and trash along the hillside in Muldoon is our highest areas.
Right. Yeah, so I think a couple things on this. This is based on calls, so it's not a perfect form of data. Stuckingham Heights, for example, which you can see is sort of between the two, it's the white area on the right of the map, if you're on the Anchorage Bowl, sort of between the two big blobs. There are bears going through there constantly, to the point that when I went door knocking there, I carried bear spray. But they don't call because they live in Stuckingham Heights. Bears are just a part of their life. Mr. Battle has also spoken to me. Has also spoken to me about the fact that it does move around a little bit. But I think, sort of unsurprisingly and sort of intuitively, there are two main areas aside from Goodwood and Eagle River where you can see the calls concentrated, and they're the areas that border the park or border the Jay Bear Reservation, and that's Muldoon and the hillside. And the reason I think this is valuable is because we're going to have a discussion about fining people. So the clerk is passing out a draft ordinance that was presented to us. This might be a latter version of it by the administration that deals with basically fining people who do not secure their trash or defining that. And the issue is, particularly for my interests in Upper Muldoon, you set up a system where it's very difficult for people to secure their trash in the time frame that the administration has laid out, and it's prohibitively expensive for them to get bear-resistant carts because the carts are only offered in certain sizes by Alaska Waste. Unfortunately, this is all outside of, or mostly outside of, the SWS area, so we can't do direct. Muldoon is outside of SWS.
Just depends on which side of the road you're on. Parts of Muldoon fall into SWS service.
Okay, well, I mean, I've lived in these areas, and most of it is Alaska Waste, and I think the affected areas are almost exclusively
To the chair, actually, large portions of Muldoon, particularly on the west side of Muldoon, Dubin, areas like that, those all fall within solid waste services.
Okay. All right. But so perhaps we could do something directly, like we actually, ironically, did a pilot project in Airport Heights with Mr. Rivera's leadership. Although, ironically, if you look on the thing here, there's no bear calls there. So either it was extremely effective, or we were perhaps targeting our resources to the wrong neighborhood, a neighborhood that was very up in arms, but is nowhere near as impacted actually as Muldoon or the hillside. But my point is, if we're going to be, before this ordinance gets too far down the tracks, I want to have a conversation about what we do about Upper Muldoon. In a place where people don't have garages, can't afford the bear carts, and are potentially going to be subject to a lot of fines. And so that's the discussion I want us to have. But I also want us to have a broader discussion about how we deal with this, and if we can get a good ordinance going forward this summer. I would like to see that passed. So, yeah, Mr. Chair, I would go from anywhere from here. I don't know if Mr. Sheedy wants to speak to the ordinance that they have sent to us, or if we want to go a different direction.
Sure. I just have one quick question, I guess, to Mr. Dunbar and comment, and I was going to bring it up, but you're right that there appears to be no dots in the map on either Rogers Park or Airport Heights, and those are really the two communities that instigated me putting forth that ordinance. I believe that if there had been the opportunity to do the same in your area, we would have done so, but unfortunately that's Alaska Waste. So that actually brings me to my question. Has Alaska Waste been a part of these discussions?
I reached out to them and had a couple times and had a long conversation with those folks back when we first had this. I think it was August or September of last year. And I feel like they were largely in agreement with the administration's approach, which is based on fining residents that put their trash out too early. But again, the ordinance as was written then didn't require them to change their pickup times, didn't require them to do any significant investment in bear-proof containers, and didn't require them to do any cross-subsidization or even offer different sizes of containers for the residents in this area. So I think that they were supportive because it didn't ask them to do anything. That could be an uncharitable But they also like made all this noise about, oh, we're going to invest in these, we're going to get new size containers, and when I was talking to them, but I don't know if they've actually done it yet or not. I was hoping they would be here. I don't know if anyone from Alaska Waste is here. I don't think so. But I'd like to, if we could do another work session, have you reach out to them, have you reach out to SWS, and get more folks here.
Thank you, Mr. Doe. Mr. Shi.
Sure. So just to start with, be very careful with the thing you have in front of you, because this is extremely draft, and there are large portions of it that have changed, and there are actually large portions of it, actually the majority of it, has the wrong code citation. 1595 is actually currently our plastic ban or plastic bag provisions, and so just take this with a grain of salt. But the gist of it is correct, as Mr. Dunbar pointed out, which is to address the issue of bear trash interactions, which I think would have been a better title for this work session. And the tools that it uses are requirements on the time that you put trash out, the ways in which you secure trash, and then, as Mr. Dunbar pointed out, ultimately fines for those people or those individuals who choose not to obey the rules. Speaking real quickly, Alaska Waste at previous work sessions talked about their high bear areas policies. So they actually have a high bear risk policy in place for their service area, and it's actually surprisingly small. It largely mimics a lot of what you see on your map here from ADF and G, but it does not extend quite as far west as I would imagine between the Chigash State Park boundary and Muldoon, for example. In those areas, they do not mandate the bear-resistant containers. They offer them, of course, but they do have a different schedule. And it reflects one of the comments I heard, I believe Mr. Dunbar bring up, or someone in the past bring up, which is it's hard for a lot of people to have time in the morning to put trash out prior to pickup. So what average people do is they put it out the night before, and we know that leads to a lot of these problems. Alaska Waste does a later pickup in their high bear risk areas, and that's something I want us to note, because one of the things that we've talked about in later iterations of this draft ordinance is being more flexible on the pickup times and actually trying to shift some of the responsibility for that to the carriers themselves, so that they're not driving the schedule to those early hours, but they recognize that people have lives and can't get up at 5 like some of us and put the trash out. So anyway, the Alaska Waste information is available on the website. I just wanted to double check it's still there if you wanted to see what they consider the high bear risk area and the policies they follow there. Secondly, in relation to this, there's two key things that this ordinance will do when you have a draft in front of you. The first is there's lots of Title 15 sections that need to be cleaned up as it relates to trash currently. Current code has a number of deficiencies and actually inconsistencies that we're trying to fix. And then secondly, the big gist of it is the secure trash zones, or the bear trash areas, whatever you want to call them. The approach taken by this, the conceptual approach taken by these early versions of this ordinance is to have the municipal manager designate those areas that should be considered as secure trash areas based on some kind of data point, whether it's actually ADF and G reports, bear reports, or some other methodology. It's a very squishy concept at this point, and the municipal manager, if he was here, would tell you he doesn't like having that power. There's no check and balance. There's no clear path for how these decisions are made. There's no clear path for how you undo a secure trash area. So, we know that bears move around. So if you have a secure trash area in Muldoon for the summer of 2018, it doesn't necessarily stand that it should remain so in 2019. These are some of the issues that are still being worked out. The other issue is related to the types of containers and the mandatory requirements for bear resistant. As you heard Mr. Dunbar say, there's a lot of challenges with that. There's differences between the carriers currently. There's a lack of variety in the sizes. I don't know about you, but it takes me about a month and a half to go through 96 gallons of waste. And then, of course, there's the age-old question of, well, is it truly a bear-resistant container? Because they typically can find ways to get into most anything. So those are some outstanding questions and issues. What we have not done in this ordinance, and is a larger discussion the Assembly should have, is the latter point that Mr. Dunbar raised, which is this does place a financial burden on either the carriers, or potentially both, on the carriers and the customers. And is there a way to mitigate some of those costs? I think as long as we remain focused on the intent, which is to minimize the likelihood of a bear trash incident, I think we can get there. But that's a part of this question that we have not, the administration has not talked about. So we look forward to that discussion.
Sure. Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Dunbar.
Let's go through a few more. So we met last week looking at this version that you have in front of us. I think Chris hit the highlights, but there are a couple other issues we talked about there. And actually, start up when we say waste haulers, there's Alaska Waste and Blue Arctic who do residential, but this would also do commercial. So you've got probably 5 or 6 in alley dumpsters, Alaska Waste, Blue Arctic. There's several out there now, so there's really more than, it's not just Alaska Waste. But one was the pickup time, and this says no earlier than 5 a.m. And then the question is that realistic? And then is that realistic? If you have a bear cart, why do you care? Another was notice time to haulers. If you say, okay, this is a safety zone, do you need to give them 3, 4, 5? How much time do they need to make it happen to replace all the things? So we need this is something to be looked at. And then the first fine, have something in there that in lieu of the first fine, if you get a bear cart, we'll let you go. And then if you have another problem, then the fine kicks in. Girdwood is about 85% bear carts, and they'd like to very soon go 100%. So once this is done, kind of the intent would be, however we do it, they become the first secure trash regulation zone, and it's our guinea pig. We'll find out what unexpected things happen when we do that. But we also say who would report violations. So you say, okay, everybody's got to have a bear cart, and there's something in here to say the haulers would be, they would know because what are they billing for? So they would say, okay, these people haven't swapped out. And then the final thing is I had sent in just this morning, just kind of almost a brainstorm suggestion, but one is to make it just broadly that you can put out the trash at 9 p.m., which is kind of where we are now, I think, basically where it is. But added the requirements for secure trash regulation zones that a possible first step, if there's a problem, is say, okay, you guys have a problem, now it's 5 a.m. for your district. So you shorten that window, and you'd also have to get the trash haulers to change their schedule so that they wouldn't pick up before 8 or 9 or whatever. So that would be the first step, and then if that doesn't work, then you go to, all right, everybody gets a bear cart. And thinking there was, one, not to be too heavy-handed, but also in areas that have, it's just expensive. Then maybe that'll work, and you're not going to impose expenses on people. So that is the thing at this point, except what we talked about today, is things that are being worked on in the next draft. So, yeah, all right.
Yeah, and I would I wish there was someone from the administration here who's actually working on the draft, because I don't think you are you?
I have the pen on this.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So just to go off what he just said, first, I like the idea of Girdwood as sort of a test case. And I think, to Mr. Falsey's concern of giving him, bear zone dictatorial power, I definitely think it's better if we just wrote it into code. We've done this a number of times where it's like, here are the bear zones, and it looks like a list that we can add and subtract by code. And I think that takes it out of his hands and makes it a little more transparent as well. Now the problem is, as you say, that the bears move around and it shifts a little bit. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, look, this area of Muldoon is always, some part of Muldoon is almost always a hot spot. Some part of the hillside is always a hot spot, and Girdwood's always a hot spot. And so I'd also like to build a bear barrier. I think if you were of bear-resistant containers and good qualities, I'm not going to build a wall. What I'm saying is, I do think if you were able to reduce the amount of trash out on these edges that abut the park, you would have the effect of, maybe the biologist can correct me if I'm wrong, but are the bears going to push through there, go way deep into the city? I mean, some of them might, but how many of them? Or are they going to get to this area where we have good policies, there's no trash to be found, and turn around and go back into the park?
First, you are correct about, typically there's always hot spots in Muldoon and on the hillside. I mean, when I'm just talking about shifting, I mean, shifting from like North Muldoon is a little bit down Muldoon.
Yeah.
A certain neighborhood might have extra trash that year or something like that that draws them, and we get more calls from it, but the hot spots really don't shift much out of Muldoon. And then some years we'll have, like, I think 2 years ago we had a hot spot near Westchester Lagoon. We had one bear that spent the whole summer, around Westchester, going up to some of those neighborhoods there, and we got a lot of calls from there. It was probably one bear, but it generated a lot of calls because they weren't used to seeing a bear in the area.
Right.
So that's one of the drawbacks of using call volume as your metric for hot spots. But for bears, they do move through town. Chester Creek, with their enhanced runs of salmon now, they'll use corridors, so they will come into town. I mean, I was part of the group that moved the bear that was right here in the cemetery a couple years ago. So I mean, they do move through town and come into town, but the hot spots are along the park, in Government Hill, along J Bear, along the park, along Muldoon, Upper Hillside, and then along Kincaid. Those are where you can traditionally see bears moving through town.
Yeah.
And then along the green belts, Campbell Creek, Chester Creek, that's where they're going to come further into town, because they don't want to cut through neighborhoods as much. They like the green belts as their corridors into town.
Are you familiar with, so I've heard that Juneau is just all bear-resistant carts the entire time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Now obviously we are 10 times the size of Juneau, so that's probably not practical here. But I do think it speaks to the notion that bear-resistant carts are at least useful. And I read some, I got an email from Donna Mears, who was working with this issue years ago, and she had said that bear-resistant carts generally weren't effective because people weren't using them right. They basically, the people were getting them in some of the test areas and Muldoon and just leaving them open, or like overfilling them basically, so they weren't effective. But I think that we can mitigate that, and she says actually in her email too that a more effective approach is what the administration has up here with fines. I think the combination of two, right? We will help you get a bear card, a bear-resistant card, and if you don't use it properly, we're going to fine you. I think that is kind of what I'm looking for here.
Sure, Mr. Shee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to that, so looking at this, what we've done is we've looked at communities across the country that are similarly situated, high bear activity communities, from Colorado to Missoula to take your pick, any mountain town. Because largely we share similarities with them, despite being 3 times as large, for example, than Missoula. Towns like that have adopted a across-the-board bear-proof or bear-resistant either trash container, or in the case of dumpsters, they call them, I'm going to use the wrong term, but basically trash fence. So they have bear-resistant cages, if you will, in which trash cans or dumpsters can go. And they take that approach because it's the easiest way to mitigate those kinds of interactions. And then on top of that, as you pointed out, there are fines for people that don't abide by those rules. So we've looked at that model. We think that eventually that actually is probably the best policy call for Anchorage, but in the short term, working our way towards that incrementally is probably much more realistic. In the latest draft of the ordinance that we talked about, this is to go back to your point earlier about just coming out and putting certain parts in code, or certain parts of town in code. It's not flexible enough, we think. And the way that we've kind of resolved it temporarily is that, similar to a lot of other designation actions that the administration takes for any number of things, they are designations or recommendations for designation that come to you. And so if Mr. Falsey or whomever is municipal manager would like to designate Girdwood as a secure trash zone, that would come to you in the form of a resolution. You guys would be free to have a public hearing on it in case Girdwood shows up and says, wait a second, we bow hunt all of our bears, there's none here, so why are you doing this to us? So it provides that check and balance, and it also provides a mechanism by which at a later date they can be de-designated if determined that they're no longer issues.
Well, can I think that de-designation is both, unless it's a disaster, I think it's both relatively unlikely and also impractical. I mean, if we roll out a bunch of bear-resistant carts all over Muldoon, and again, Muldoon just that chunk of Muldoon probably has 20,000 people, right? I mean, so if we get bear-resistant containers all through there, and then we're like, okay, you're no longer a zone anymore. We know these things are a significant capital investment by utility. I mean, what would they even do with that? I mean, I guess they could put them into a different part of town, but I don't know if the demand would be there. It just seems like it's the kind of thing that, like, once it's designated, it's extremely unlikely to be undesignated.
And through the chair, I certainly appreciate that thought, and that, you know, that was the approach taken initially, was that this is something that needs to be flexible in the early stages in order to respond to not only the biological issues, but also to public perception. Ultimately, though, you're absolutely right, especially given the statement I made earlier about the best policy bowl-wide really is just to mandate bear-resistant containers across. We do it for all of our projects, whether Parks and Rec or even municipal buildings, et cetera. But that's a much different conversation. If this ordinance comes out saying our end game is to make everyone in the city have bear-resistant containers, you'll have a much different conversation than saying we want to see how this works by doing secure trash zones first. I think that's the approach that we're taking. But if you'd like to try a different one, I'd certainly be open to it. We do not expect that anybody would be de-designated, but this process would allow for that.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I live right in the middle of the brightest red spot on this map. And I think part of the reason that it's so bright, yeah, we had bears, quite a bit of bears last year, but I have a neighbor across the street who will call in every single time there's a bear in the neighborhood. And as a matter of fact, I actually had to pick up trash that a bear got into on Tuesday morning already. And it was, for some reason, the bear likes to grab the trash from across the street, drag it over onto my yard, and then get in it and make a real big mess and then leave. And so it looks like they got in my trash, when in reality it's the neighbor's trash. But most of those calls were because we had a black bear with yearling cubs, and they kept coming back. And once they found the garbage early in the season, they kept coming back and back and back. And so we don't know if they're going to be back this year or not. But you know, ever since they straightened Chester Creek out, and there's a few more fish in Chester Creek, we've had more bear encounters. And we probably figured that was going to happen before we ever did that. So that's the situation where I think I have two people in my neighborhood that have bear-resistant trash cans.
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's a good point. I'm in scenic foothills, and we too have had our first black bear visit this season. Going back to Girdwood, and Mr. Edgington's here from Girdwood Board of Supervisors, so I don't want to leave them out, but we were down there last week, 2 weeks ago, for the quarterly Girdwood Board of Supervisors meeting. And this was a very important topic. This is a very important topic to Girdwood. One of the things that's unique about Girdwood that's different than Anchorage is the transient summer population. And Mr. Edgington can speak to this, but certainly with a lot of Airbnbs and other vacation rentals in that community and guests who are not bear aware, Girdwood deals with a lot of unsecured trash. And so for Girdwood, this is a big issue because the people who don't live there don't know the rules, and they're the ones that can potentially cause the problem. So from the get-go, whether it's by official Bill Falsey decree or assembly action, we have always pictured Girdwood as being the first one that we want this to stand in. And that remains the case today. I have not heard the same from Chugiak Eagle River, but I suspect that many, particularly in Eagle River Valley, would feel the same way. But we'd like to get to a point where we can have these rules in place for Girdwood. And for Girdwood, the fine schedule is really what's kind of important to them, because as Mr. Welton pointed out, they're almost all the way there for 100% consistent containers. For them, it's about being able to remind the absentee property owners who have the Airbnbs that your tenants need to do this too, otherwise you're going to get the fines. And I think that that's an important consideration in this. One last thing, on the issue of timing, so timing actually is a lot of the way to solve the problem. Obviously it's not 100%, but if you had an ideal world where pickup and rolling out to the curb were synchronous, none of this would be an issue. To the point that Mr. Weddleton made, where we actually were going, John, before we got your edits, is that we had 2 time horizons for trash takeout, depending on whether it's a bear-resistant cart or a non-bear-resistant cart. And the bear-resistant cart, as Mr. Weddleton pointed out, who cares? So we basically said 12 hours before pickup, nobody cares. It's those that are not bear-resistant, particularly if it's in a secure trash area or a high-density area. That's the one that we're really worried about. So. We worked in some flexibility to that provision, not quite as flexible as yours as doing 9 p.m. the night before, but we certainly could talk about that. That's a realistic one. But the big thing with that is ensuring that even a non-bear resistant trash container is secured, meaning lid down. You don't have trash bags sitting outside outside of the canister. Where we haven't really talked, what we really haven't talked about is the impact that this can have on larger density developments. And we were discussing this ordinance with representatives from the Building Owners and Managers Association, who I thought largely would be interested in this because this protects their property as well. I got quite an earful from them, particularly from Anchorage Neighborhood Housing. They have a number of properties in East Anchorage, off of Dutton, for example, where their tenants physically cannot put their trash in the dumpster. They are disabled, they are 80 years old. So when they drag trash from their unit to the dumpster, they leave the bag there, and Anchorage Neighborhood Housing is getting all kinds of fines for that. So I think we need to, there's a little bit more work that needs to be done, but ultimately that's where we want to get.
Thank you, Mr. Shooty. I put myself in the queue, and I have Ms. Zolotel and Ms. LaFrance. So,
am I in the queue there?
No, I do not. I'll add you in there. So I am struggling a little bit with the policy call that this idea of these zones for bear-resistant carts must be tied together with fines. So in your research, did you find that it was pretty much unanimous across the board in the lower 48 that they tied those 2 together?
Yes, and just to clarify, the updates to the fine schedule and the secure trash requirements is not just for the bear areas, it's citywide. So people, like the examples that I've given, people who are not properly securing their trash need to learn to do so. And we did include a get out of jail free card, as Mr. Wilson pointed out, where for your first offense, we could find you, or especially if you're in the Bear area and you choose to get a secure trash, then you're good to go. So it's a gentle fund.
Got it.
And I don't think that's reflected in the draft you're looking at.
Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing that. My particular concern is sort of the escalator here, 100 to 250 to 500, and then 500 thereafter after the third and subsequent offense. The type of impact that might have on, particularly high density, low income neighborhoods. If you look at Mountain View, Mountain View is one of those neighborhoods that is on the lower end of the spectrum, but they see bears too. So have you looked at the impacts that this would have on those types of neighborhoods?
Thank you for that question. I just wrote a note in the margin to myself to do that. Not specifically saying what's the impact of a $250 fine to a Mountain View resident, but trying to do a comparison across jurisdictions so we can say Missoula's fines are only $10, et cetera. And I haven't done that, but I will.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand this draft isn't the current one, so are there emergency provisions in the current draft? I used to live off of Tudor and Lake Otis, backing up to Campbell Creek, and we only got bears. We never reported them because we were used to them, but for like 2 to 3 weeks all summer, when we have trash problems. So would there be an opportunity then for the municipality to say, we hadn't designated this area, now there's suddenly a problem, maybe it's time with the salmon, it's a short-term designation, and then how, thinking about getting the notice out to folks, timing-wise.
Thank you. Good question through the chair. We did not actually look at that, and one of the challenges with it, and Ms. Welton alluded to this earlier, is the notification. There is no perfect way of notifying everyone in a given area that, hey, whether it's for 2 weeks or going to be for the whole summer. Your area is a high bear activity area, therefore it needs to be a secure trash area. We struggled with that, and one of the directions we thought about going is to place the responsibility for that in the hands of the service providers, so that if you're serviced by Blue Arctic or Alaska Waste, we're telling them, hey, all of your customers in this area, they have to be their secure trash area, and they have to have bear-resistant containers. But we struggled with that because you know, there's cost differences. Do they have to wait 30 days for a new billing cycle, et cetera? So we haven't quite solved that question, but I think your point is good. We haven't looked at it in an emergency situation yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowenthal. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question follows along those lines of the financial aspects. And I'm wondering, Mr. Trudy, if you could maybe just touch on some options. For example, well, there are a number of different carriers involved, and there are regulatory issues as far as how costs will be handled depending on who's your carrier and what the city can do. Could this be an area-wide power that everyone, you know, pays into to, you know, address these kinds of things, or, you know, what are the options that are being considered?
Thank you, through the chair. That's a tough question. Absolutely, because it's true that an additional $35 a month impacts me differently than it impacts somebody who makes $17 an hour, for example. And I think that the easiest way to solve that, well, I don't think we've arrived at the easiest way to solve that yet. One, you know, the idea of the service providers themselves doing it and passing costs off to ratepayers is one that has been met with resistance by by Arctic and Blue Arctic and by Alaska Waste. Solid Waste Services is not RCA regulated, but the other two are, I believe, is my understanding of that. So that could present some challenges, whether or not RCA would accept a rate increase that reflects the need to invest in that infrastructure. The bear-resistant cans themselves are pricey, but not out of reach. You can get them online at Amazon for $349. And if you figure out a way to spread that over, you know, the lifespan of whatever those cans might be, 10 years, 12 years, turns out to be pretty affordable. But I don't think we have an elegant answer to your question yet. And it's one that we know is of interest to this body. We would welcome ideas.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So off of that, when we had this original discussion, I do remember Alaska Waste saying something along the lines of, the RCA won't let you do this. I'm skeptical of that for two reasons. One, because it does seem like other communities in Alaska have done some form of this, of mandating bear-resistant containers. Now, it might be the case that those aren't RCA regulated for some reason, I'm not sure. But again, I'm sort of skeptical. And I think that we should at least try, right, to involve the utilities, not just force the cost onto the residents. Now, if the argument is, you know, you have to have a pure cost or cost payer model, and you can't cross-subsidize, you know, so it's $35 if we're only mandating it in certain places. You know, the other option is to spread that cost across the entire service area and say, like, again, getting back to my bear barrier idea, they basically, by doing this, you are performing a service for everyone, because the bears are more likely to stop coming into Anchorage in the same amount of numbers, and then they won't harm people behind the barrier, basically. But either way, I do think that we should try to include some mandates, whether it's cost or otherwise, in this ordinance on the utilities. Maybe it's timing, maybe it's just saying you must carry bear-resistant containers, and then people have the option to use them or not, but you must carry them in every size or in certain sizes in order to operate a utility in the municipality of Anchorage. And then if they want to have an RCA fight, we'll have it, but I think we should at least try. On Gerber as a test case, I support that both because it is they're really well organized, they seem to want it, and they have these unique challenges, but also because they are, on average, far wealthier than my area. So as we're working through the costs of the containers, that's important. And I wanted to just illustrate something really quickly about the kind of multifamily and and R1 that we have. So if you imagine this is the J Bear Reservation in Muldoon. So one of the issues is we talk about like when can you take it down to the curb. So this is orange circle in my mind. This is peck. So if you think about it, the bears are coming from here. We're saying you can't put it down to the curb. You have to keep it by your house. We actually are mandating they keep it closer to where the bears are coming from than going down to the curb. And so this guy right here, when I knocked on his door, he had been threatened by he was going to get a fine basically, and he was like, they're going to double the cost for me to get a bear-resistant container. Because I don't have a garage, I don't have a secure place to put it. So they said, I think this is probably the state regulators, I have to put it down by the curb, and I need a bear-resistant container if the bear keeps coming back here. And at the time, because his container was much smaller than the kind offered by Alaska Waste, it was going to double its cost. Now, if we could get them in the same sizes, then we're talking $1 or $2, maybe $3 more per month. That's much more manageable, right? And so to me, the size of the container needs to really be thought about. And again, this idea that we find people if they put it out too early, it doesn't really reflect the reality in Muldoon. Because where they place the container, whether it's next to their house or down on the curb, doesn't have a huge impact on the bears here. Because again, they don't have garages and they don't have those enclosures, and almost none of them have bear-resistant containers.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
So his issue gets to what he should probably do is have some kind of structure to protect it, which isn't a huge cost. And we have here inside the structure, we're within 5 feet of the principal structure. And that 5 feet of the principal structure really doesn't give us much. It's almost like that defeats everything. Because that's 6 days a week, 6.5. It's right up there in the open, So it is a good point.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. It's next to the primary structure.
Inside a structure and delete more within 5 feet of the principal structure. Because that's like, here and there.
Yeah, but we're not going to be able to, I don't know. I think it's impractical for us, but I mean, there are hundreds of housing units here. Forcing them all to build those wooden structures, I think is sort of unrealistic.
Well, then they get bear carts.
Which is fine, so long as the bear carts are offered in the size they currently use. If we force them to jump up to 96 gallons or whatever, it's going to, the Northeast Community Council, there will be 500 people there out for blood. And I think rightly so, because utilities aren't doing what they need to do, which is get these in the appropriate sizes.
So through the chair, this is a question that we've asked all of the providers, and we continue to get kind of different answers. Are there alternative sizes available? And the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is yes, but they do not meet the same stringent requirements that the 96-gallon size does currently, but they are on their way, is what we are told.
That's what I was told too. But I think if they're on their way, then great. When this ordinance goes into effect, they'll be ready to comply. It's the same thing with the scheduling thing. Like, we're already doing this. Great. And you comply with the law, and we're going to make the law, But I'm tired of getting this sort of runaround of like, yes, we're doing this, then we're not doing this. Yes, they're on their way. No, they're not on their way. And I was told that it's not offered in that size. And then I looked into Juneau, and they're offering it in that size. They're like, it's not manufactured anywhere in the world in that size, but in Juneau they have it somehow.
Yeah, there's different, like everything in this world, there's different rating criteria for the bear-resistant trash containers. And I can't speak for the private providers in town. Solid Waste Services has a certain list of criteria for them to qualify as bear-resistant. And it's true that their list of criteria are not available yet in the smaller 32-gallon size, or 36-gallon size, but will be soon.
If we had to slightly reduce that criteria, I just don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good here, right? I want to get these out in appropriate sizes as much as possible. I know the other issue that we have talked about, of course, is like the physical, like they have to be a certain kind so they can be picked up by the machines and don't. And that's another challenge that we have.
Through the chair, yes, currently there's a couple of different lid mechanisms that are out there, and that's been sort of the debate between Solid Waste Services and the other providers. Solid Waste Services does not want locking or latching lids because it requires additional labor to get out, unlock, or unlatch. They prefer the gravity-fed kind, Alaska Waste, and I think both Blue Arctic and Alaska Waste actually can accommodate the locking or latching kind.
No, they have the gravity.
Oh, they have gravity kind, okay.
Yeah, they don't like.
And they don't like the
sending
latching.
their people out to lock it, so they're only doing the gravity.
Anything further? Mr.
Yeah,
Dunbar?
one last thing we have to keep in mind here, just in anticipation of tonight, or even what we're going to get. Some of the bear-resistant containers are more difficult to manipulate, to get open and close, and particularly for elderly people, it's a real challenge. So,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Littleton. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question had to do with the cards, some of the aspects that Mr. Dunbar raised. Because, Mr. Schutte, you had mentioned that some of the cards are available on Amazon, but knowing that different carriers have different requirements, probably we don't want to be encouraging people yet to buy those. So as far as like time frame for this ordinance and trying to get it out as quickly as it can we fast track the Girdwood piece, for example? Or I mean, what's your plan, I guess, for the time frame on this? Because we're just about, or actually into, I guess, from your account.
Yeah, we're already there.
Yeah.
Through the chair, we haven't talked about bifurcating this in some way to write code sections that only apply to Girdwood. But certainly if it seems like there's going to be a lengthier discussion about subsidized cans and things like that, that maybe it's worth having that discussion.
Mr. Bowman.
Right. So we could get this out with the modifications we talked about and do Girdwood and not add other areas, knowing that we haven't really worked out some of these details. So Girdwood's there, we watch and see what happens. And then we can make changes. You know, part of it, I mean, this could still hold almost completely if we find RCA will let the cost of bear cards be spread out amongst all the customers. That really doesn't change anything here. It just makes it cheaper for people to
yes,
get a
but
bear card.
I will say on that, we have to make sure still that utilities get them in all the sizes. Because one thing they could do is bump everybody up to 96 and then spread that pretty tremendous cost out amongst everybody. You don't want that.
Right, but the omnipotent municipal manager knows these things and will wait. So we get Girdwood in there, and then he's not going to designate these areas in the department until these things are reported. We could have it whereas it's before the ordinance, kind of saying these are kind of the broad issues.
So through the chair, we could do that. Now keep in mind, this ordinance has in it items not 100% related to the bear areas themselves. There are other Title 15 fixes in here as well. And in particular, the section of 1510 that is proposed for updating talks about plastic bags and whether or not they are appropriate, but it also talks about the requirements for rollout time for pickup. So there are other items in here that I think are unresolved as well, but are equally important, I think, in the discussion. The fines, for example, is another one, particularly if Girdwood is going to be the test case, because that's something that we've heard a lot from Girdwood, or at least in the last GLOS meeting, we heard a lot in dealing with that. So what I think we can do is we can talk about whether or not this can move forward, because I think we're 90% of the way there. This can just move forward with the understanding that whatever the actual designation methodology is, it's going to be Girdwood specific, pending bigger picture discussion about how to roll it out in Anchorage. I think that can happen. I think that can happen this season. So the timeline that we were on was not for the addendum for next Tuesday, but actually for the following May meeting.
Okay, so introduce May 21st, have a vote on it in the first June meeting?
Correct.
Okay. And then would the body like another work session after introduction to maybe continue talking about some of these issues?
I think yes, because we need to get the trash removed.
Okay, well then we can do that. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I was going to ask Mr. Edgington if there's anything in what we talked about you wanted to comment, since we've been talking a lot about Girdwood.
Yeah, just a couple of things. The first thing is, yes, would be a great test case. The only thing that makes it slightly different, well, one of the things that makes it different is we have a we have a trash transfer station in town. So every property is within basically a mile of a trash transfer station. So a lot of people, actually including me, have gone away from curbside recycling to just taking your trash there twice a month and paying $3. So there is that mechanism, there is that escape route from curbside pickup, which isn't necessarily available everywhere else. The other thing I wanted to mention is we have, well, first of all, not everyone there is affluent. In terms of residents, it's a pretty bimodal population between sort of professionals and independently wealthy and people who are just working service jobs and spend 45, 50, 60% of their income on accommodation. So we do have people who are very, very cost sensitive, and that's actually where the transfer station is very useful. In terms of problem areas, it's 1 or 2 residential locations, plus some of the commercial locations. There's some HOAs that have been very resistant to moving to just putting locks on existing cars or the larger bins. And having some teeth behind it would actually be really helpful, because at the moment it's just hassle putting a lock in. If there's actually a fine for not doing so, then suddenly it becomes a very easy equation. That would be very helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
That's a good point. The utilities aren't here, but trash gets picked up in that area just once a week, right? Maybe twice a week, once a week in these areas. So it's sitting next to your house the whole time, and it's not in a very resistant container. It doesn't really matter if it's on the curb or not. But if you were to padlock it or otherwise lock it in some way, that might be one way to make sure, like, the fact that make it bear resistant. Do the current non-resistant carts have a place where you can do that? I mean,
I believe so. At least my Alaska Waste can does.
Mine has to be West Campus.
I mean,
Can I just interject? It's a very common thing. People who don't have garages have small shafts in for them just to put straps around it and have it locked up.
yeah. I know people there put like lye or bleach or something. People are putting stuff on the top of the lids and stuff and that kind of thing too to discourage stuff. Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was fighting fire, we used to put lye into the latrines so the bears can eat it, because bears are gross and they'll eat the latrine. But you don't want a whole bunch of lye on the outside in Anchorage. But yeah, I mean, maybe if the cans are just designed with like a little hole in them, so you could literally put a padlock on it for 6 days a week, that might go somewhere too. And then we could find people that don't do a padlock, and I'd be more comfortable with that. Purchase $5, $6 padlock like that if that was enough.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that. So in the draft ordinance, one of the changes to the current code section 1510.070 is to say that when not in use, your trash can needs to be closed and secured. And we don't define what secured means because of this debate of is it bungee cords or is it padlocks. As long as it's secured, then that's fine. And in my mind, secured means don't leave the lid open, probably. But it's deliberately sort of vague because of that. But the point being that when not in use, currently code does not require you to pull it back to the house or back to the garage or whatever your choices are. And one of the changes we'd like to see is to require that.
Yes.
I just have one comment to the chair about the locking just the plastic lid. We help the Alaska Zoo every year do the test of bear-resistant cans, and when the plastic lids on a normal can don't have that extra reinforcement, and so if a bear is determined enough, those are a lot easier to pop open than the one with the reinforcement in them.
Yeah.
So it will deter some bears because they'll mess with it a little bit, not worth the hassle, they'll move on.
Right.
But the lock alone or the bungee cord alone, often for a determined bear, is not much compared to a bear-resistant can.
Sure. A bear-resistant can is definitely preferable, but it's like you've got this sort of menu of options here. We're trying to carry some.
In a heavy bear, like at the zoo, like some of the zoo bears are well fed. So when they push on a can, they can pop that lid very easily.
Yeah.
Compared to some of the smaller bears, some adults you see mostly around Muldoon and stuff like that. But It is some level of deterrent, but a bear resistant is definitely the gold standard for keeping a bear out of the trash can.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but even a bear-resistant can can't keep all the bears out. Some of the bears have got it figured out and are smart enough to pop that thing open. You know, they're hungry and they're motivated. So
You might say they're smarter than the average bear.
there you go. That's right.
Thank you.
And you are correct. I've witnessed, you know, you go up to a neighborhood to check on a bear call, and you'll see the line of trash cans. And right now, you can see that, you know, the easy ones will knock over, feed. And if there's a lot of trash cans, the harder ones to get into, they'll just, you know, knock over, keep moving.
Yeah.
But there are certain bears, when they're determined, they'll find a way to get in. And that's why they're resistant and not proof. I mean, they're not 100%, but they are a good alternative. I mean, I don't know if Mr. Battle talked a little bit about the pilot study we had about, I think it's about 10 years ago, on Muldoon and Stuckagen Heights. And Stuckagen Heights kept with, you know, a high number of bear-resistant cans in their neighborhood. And we get maybe 1 or 2 bear and trash calls in that neighborhood. I mean, it's a corridor, bears move through there, but they don't stay. And that's the key, is if you have trash available, they oftentimes stick around, and that's what becomes a hot spot because they keep going from house to house and finding more trash. But like Stuckagen, they move through, and you can see there's one point in the map right now, and it's a good example of how they could work in some situations.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also a pure economics example. Like, offer them at reduced or free. Stuckagen, they kept them because they have garages and because they're wealthier. Muldoon, as soon as the subsidy went away, so did the resistant cans.
You're exactly right, yeah.
All right, so it looks like we have a path forward on this. Thank you for bringing this to us in draft form.